Welcome back to Son of Chelsea. Daniel Childs here. Hope you're doing really well. Team selector time, preview, thoughts and feelings ahead of the Champions League clash at Qarabag tomorrow evening, especially UK time. I'm not sure where you're based, but in the UK it's an earlier kickoff for a midweek game, and Chelsea have the chance to make it 3 wins in a row in the Champions League, get up to 9 points, and again bank one of these what I would consider winnable Champions League ties in the first phase of the competition. But I think there is some complications with this game because obviously coming off the weekend, some of the rotations that I think we expect will likely happen in this game. And as I consistently say, with these type of games, it's how you measure the risk of rotating along with the necessity to do it given our heavy fixture schedule. But who could benefit from that rotation? We'll get into that. We'll look at Maresca's press conference. We'll look at the opposition and some of the interesting numbers and facts about them. And then also I will give you, as usual, my predicted Chelsea starting lineup. Please do get involved in the comments down below. Give me your predicted Chelsea lineups, preferred Chelsea lineups and thoughts ahead of this game. So from Maresca's press conference, there is one player unavailable for this game, and that is Pedro Neto. Hopefully he will be available again for the Wolves game. It didn't sound like a massive problem, but he's unavailable for this game. He was missing Chelsea training, so people kind of knew something was up, and then Maresca confirmed it. Good news though on Benoit Badiashile. There was a Cole Palmer injury update. I know there's been some reporting from Simon Phillips over when Palmer may be available, but in the case of Badiashile, we got a firmer answer in terms of his return, which will be back after the international break, which is positive because I think we heard December before the Forest game. I think it was the Forest game when we got the news that Badiashile had suffered an injury, was going to be out for an extended period of time. So it may be a couple of weeks earlier, which obviously is a positive, especially when we look at sort of the left side of Chelsea's defence and also the way Badiashile performed before that injury he got against Liverpool. So that is a positive. Also, I do want to mention this because it kind of gives me a route to do a cheap plug for my Substack piece. And it is that Maresca confirmed that now Reece James can play 3 games in a week, which of course is a massive development given how for a long period of time that wasn't the case. That doesn't mean you should play Reece James 3 times a week when you don't need to, but I think it is a sign of his progress. And that was kind of the focus of my piece for Substack, which is looking at Reece James, kind of the joy and the victory whenever Reece James steps out on the pitch. Touch wood, his fitness, the improvement on it compared to 12 months ago has been remarkable, really. And that, of course, is something to savour and celebrate. So if you want to read my piece after today's show, whether listening or watching, link in the description box below. The only other thing was Chelsea have to rotate. That was basically, he said may have to rotate. I think that there is an expectation there will be rotation, and mainly because Chelsea don't land back in London until around 6 a.m. Thursday morning. This is a heavy trip to Azerbaijan for this game against Qarabag. It is one of the longer trips in the Champions League. We have, the Saturday night game against Wolves, 8 p.m. kickoff, so it's going to be a very tight turnaround. So I think factoring that into who you think may play in this game and what rotation, and also the rotation that Maresca has already done in the Champions League, I think gives us a hint on who may or may not play this game. Looking at Qarabag, there's only 2 previous meetings with Chelsea, and that was, of course, in the 17-18 season under Antonio Conte. Famously, the Davide Zappacosta goal. He scored in the home game, I believe it was a 6-0 win, and then we battered them away from home. It ended up being the same venue that Chelsea would, I think, a year later or 2 years later go on and win the Europa League against Arsenal. So there is some nice history here. I found the more revealing and kind of just maddening stat and fact around Qarabag is their manager Gurban Gurbanov was appointed in August of 2008. Now, the reason this was brought up in a press conference was reference the young age of Reggie Walsh, who was born 2 months later. And Maresca said it's unbelievable, 17 years, amazing. And just in terms of a Chelsea perspective and like a comparison, if Chelsea had the same coach from the same point Qarabag appointed Gurban Gurbanov, that would be Luis Felipe Scolari. So that is how long ago we're talking about. Absolutely maddening, the longevity for one head coach. But in terms of Qarabag, they haven't done too poorly. I mean, when they started this competition, I think there was a lot of expectation that they probably wouldn't gain many points. But, you look at the wins they've been able to rack up already. Beating Benfica, they were 2-0 done in that game. That was the game that forced a change for Jose Mourinho to arrive at Benfica. But that was a brilliant performance by them. And then I believe they beat Copenhagen in their second game. They were 1-0 up away from home against Athletic Bilbao, who are a very decent Champions League or at least European quality side, and eventually lost that game. In the league, they are second, but they're kind of expected to be near the top in terms of, they're already qualifying for the Champions League. But in terms of what Maresca said, he spoke about their intensity, especially at home. So, again, you kind of think about this in terms of, Chelsea, at times I've watched us, especially away from home, complacency, not starting off the game well, being sloppy with the ball, taking too much time on the ball, allowing the opposition to grow a level of confidence. You factor in what we did at the weekend, which was such a great performance of kind of tactical kind of conviction and the players looking so focused. It's about maintaining that in a variety of circumstances with also a variety of players if you can. So although this is a very winnable game for Chelsea, this is one that allows Maresca the freedom to rotate compared to, say, another game like Bayern or Barcelona, which is the next Champions League game after the international break, where you're not going to have the opportunity to make 10 changes and people to kind of understand it. It is, of course, still a little bit of a threat when you consider what Qarabag have done. They've upset the odds. They'll be at home. There'll be that intensity, and whether Chelsea can rise to it, even if there is some disruption and rotation within players, getting a little bit of a rest for this game. So let's take a look at my predicted starting 11. Now, I do think that Maresca, it's kind of within him to change, and when he actually has made a flurry of changes very recently, it hasn't worked out too bad. I mean, if you look at the first half of the Wolves game, Chelsea performed very, very well, had control, and then something just absolutely went wrong in that second half. And again, maybe you factor that into the rotations or just individuals, and even the experienced individuals that came off the bench didn't do much to stem the tide there. Before that, against Ajax, we were absolutely dominant, despite making, I think on that night, 10 changes. So just making a bunch of changes actually at times has seemed to help Chelsea. In the way the rotation has worked in the Premier League, some players that I would have deemed to be starters on Saturday didn't start, didn't feature that heavily. So I think naturally come into this game and actually make the team not look that weak really in terms of what I'm looking at in terms of recent performances by some of these players. However, I don't want to see Philip Jorgensen start. I just don't think it helps Chelsea, especially from set pieces, especially in ways in which Qarabag and other teams will try to look to exploit Chelsea. Set pieces, being dominant, being intense, trying to crowd round the goalkeeper. Jorgensen all round has been a poor goalkeeper for Chelsea this season. I think he is a bit of a liability. I think he raises the kind of the pressure and the uncertainty. So that means Rob Sanchez, after a dominant performance at the weekend, I think should start again. Even though, of course, Jorgensen started against Ajax, I don't think that performance was good enough either. So I just stick with Sanchez, please, at the moment, because I don't trust Jorgensen. I don't think he's performing at a good enough level to justify minutes, even in games where you're happy to rotate elsewhere. On the back four, yes, you can play Reece James 3 times a week, but I just wouldn't do it. Malo Gusto, I think, will start at right back. He did come off during the second half of the Spurs game, so I think he'll start here. The back two, I'm going to go Josh Achipom, who didn't play at all at the weekend, which was a little bit of a surprise, but it keeps him fresh for this game. And Josh Achipom has been pretty good this season. I think this is an obvious place to start him. Alongside him, if you were to go fully rotational in terms of the back two, I think the obvious answer here would be that Tosin would find his way back into the starting lineup and basically stick with the back two that started against Wolves last week. However, I'm going to stick with Trev Chalobah. I just, Tosin especially, I just don't think his performances have been convincing enough for me. And again, trying to limit those kind of fragilities or obvious things that I think could maybe aid the opposition. Even if Chelsea look dominant in the game, and especially mobility-wise and even set-piece-wise, like aerially, Tosin has not been good enough this season. So I'll stick with Trev Chalobah in that back two. Can't really be pressing, I think, and pushing Fofana much more than he currently is. You want to be patient with that. So I think, Achimpong, Chalobah as my back two. I will start Jarell Hato once again. Keeps the flow of, resting Cucurella, giving Hato minutes to gain him match sharpness and to gain him minutes in the Champions League. So I think Jarell Hato will start this game as well. Then in midfield, again, trying to rotate as much as you can. If you can rest Moises Caicedo, you want to do it. Romeo Lavia, I think, will start this game as well. And Andre Santos Santos, who of course scored, I think looked really good in that first half against Wolves, and all round didn't have a bad performance. I think, it'd be great for him to start a Champions League game. Again, you've got the midfield depth this year. You want to try and utilise it as much as you can. Caicedo, Enzo, these are players that Maresca has said publicly haven't been training all the time. So, you're on the brink of an international break, which brings with it its own problems with some of those players. You can rotate. You want to get Lavia match sharpness. You want to get Andre Santos more minutes to gain him more confidence, which is what it looked like was starting to develop against Wolves. I think this is a time for both those players to start. Esteval is obviously going to start this game. He still is being considered a rotational option. I don't really agree with that assessment. I know we won at the weekend. I still don't agree with that assessment. I want Esteval starting a majority of Chelsea games. But this is another great opportunity for him. Obviously, he scored against Wolves. Showcase his ability. He scored, of course, and dazzled against Ajax in the previous Champions League game. It's an obvious one for him to start. We're kind of in this situation where he starts, he'll probably play well, he'll impress, but then does he start the weekend? And most likely that isn't the case, which I just find a bit baffling at the moment. So maybe this will be the week where Esteval can show his stuff in midweek and then find himself in that starting 11. But maybe the excuse will be, we've had a long trek back, Esteval ain't starting against Wolves. So yeah, it's a bit frustrating. I just hope that Esteval, when he does get these opportunities, he is taking them. He isn't getting frustrated about a lack of Premier League minutes, and he showcases his ability, because I think that Premier League starting place will eventually come. It just will. The talent is too good. The consistency, the impact on Chelsea's attack is too good for, I think, Maresca to ignore much longer. Buonanotte, I think, will also start. I thought he had his worst Chelsea performance last week. He directly, I think, his sloppiness on the ball directly contributed, I believe it was, to the first Wolves goal. He's been a neat and tidy player. Again, can you rest João Pedro? He's coming off the back of a confidence-boosting win and goal from him. But I'm kind of looking at where is Maresca going to most look to rotate, and kind of the players that he feels like he absolutely needs to rest for this game. And I feel like, again, João Pedro, there's constantly been chatter about how he hasn't trained that much, maybe looking a little bit sluggish or just lacking maybe confidence at the moment. So yeah, I would take him out the firing line, keep him fresh. He's off the back of a goal against Spurs. He'll be ready for the weekend. Jamie Gittins is kind of the obvious one at left wing. Obviously, he should have absolutely buried his chance late on against Spurs. I mean, thank God Spurs were so horrendous. They didn't, pressure Chelsea at all in that added time. But he really should have had his first Premier League goal. Of course, coming off the back of his brilliant goal and I think all-round performance against Wolves, again, kind of obvious he starts this game for me. I just want to see that directness, that confidence, and he seems to be just growing into life at Chelsea. He seems a lot more comfortable, confident in his decision-making. It felt like in the first few weeks he wasn't quite understanding and having a link with his teammates, and also just maybe second-guessing himself. I think he's backing himself a lot more to take it past the fullback, to really go and be a bit more audacious, and it's benefiting Chelsea and benefiting him, which I think is why he should start. I'm a little bit conflicted on whether Mark Guiu starts, purely based on what he did against Ajax, and also the fact of kind of Delap, right? Delap was so bad off the bench against Wolves, and a discipline problem, right? And Maresca made such a deal of, this was a stupid thing for you to do, and it's kind of going to be a little bit of punishment for Delap that, all right, you'll come off the bench in this game, you're still returning to fitness, and as well, that's another thing to factor in, returning to match sharpness. Looks way off it in terms of his all-round play against Wolves when he came off the bench, along with his stupidity of getting himself sent off. I would back either Guiu or Tyreek George to start this game over Liam Delap. I'm actually going to go with Tyreek George. Tyreek George scored against Wolves. He's a player that I still think Maresca likes to use in these kind of scenarios, and given his minutes to goal ratio at the moment, it's looking pretty impressive. He scored in the last Champions League game as well. So again, I think Tyreek George will start this game. Whether again that leaves Chelsea in a predicament where it's not as impactful because you don't have a natural focal point, then at least you have 1 to 2 options off the bench that you can bring on and hopefully rectify things. But hopefully Chelsea, like they were against Wolves, are in a more comfortable position with some of the attacking players at our disposal. However, if we are in that comfortable position, the complacency simply cannot arise again, because you're not going to get away with it again the way Chelsea performed in that second half against Wolves. So that is my predicted lineup. Let me know yours. Do you agree, disagree with my rotations? Let me know in the comments below. Like, subscribe, share the podcast around with friends to get more people involved in the Son of Chelsea community, and I'll see you again very, very soon. All the best.